Okay, Zok Tehillim Gemara. We learned on Erev Shabbos about how Rabbi Yehuda knows all of the different karbonos, what they're mechaper. So the Gemara said that the Seir Hanasa B'fnim is mechaper for a chet of Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov, where there was a Yediyah Metchila, but not a Yediyah B'Soif. So it's eligible to be mechuyev a carbon oil v'yoyrei if and when the person who went into the Beis Hamikdash Tamei becomes aware that he was Tamei at the time. And the Limud told us that in order to be covered by the Sir Anasa B'fnim, it has to be a scenario where right now he's not chayiv a carbon oil v'yoyrei, because it says mipesheim, which is amazing, which doesn't bring a carbon level, and it also the cholchatoisam to tell you that it could be eligible for a chatos, and when you find out, you'll bring the chatos, and therefore it only includes a case where there was yediyah metchila and not yediyah b'soif, because if there was a yediyah b'soif and not yediyah metchila, for that you don't bring a carbon oil b'yoyred. But Freit the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel later in the Masechta is going to tell us that I hold, Dr. Rabbi Shmuel, that you could bring a carbon oil of yored, even if there was no Yediyah Mitchila. So Rabbi Shmuel Damar Ein Ba Yediyah Mitchila, B'yesh Ba Yediyah B'Soif, Bar Carbon, who could bring a carbon oil of yored. Well, that means now Yediyah Mitchila, I'm sorry, but Yesh B'Yediyah B'Soif would also be included in the kapara of the Sir Nasa B'Fnim. So Oy Bazoi, Rabbi Yehuda held that if there was no Yediyah B'Tchila and there's only Yediyah B'Soif, that's what the Sir Nasa B'Chutz takes care of. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Sir Nasa B'Fnim would take care of it. So now we have a vacancy. The Sir Nasa B'Chutz, what Avera will it be mechaper for? So Zogt Gemara, Sir Nasa B'Chutz, Amay Mechaper. If you want to say it's Al She'ein Bo Yediyah, Loy B'Tchila, V'Loy B'Soif, we've already said, Hai Se'irei Haragolim, U'Se'irei Ashachadashim Mechaper. That's covered by the Se'irei Regolim and the Se'irei Rosh Chadashim. Zogt Gemara, Somer L'Krab Meir, Rabbi Shmuel is not going to hold like Rabbi Yehuda, who creates a specific chait for each specific carbon. Rather, Hillel and Meir in our Mishnah, who told us that it's all one big happy family. The Yomer Kol HaSeirim, all of the Seirim, the Sir Nasa B'Chutz, and the Sir Rishchaydish, and the Sir Regolim, it's all Kaparos and Shava, Al Tumash, Mikdosh, V'Kadosh. Right? Rashi in the Mishnah says the only one that's different is the Seir Hanasa B'Fnim, and that's only for Yediyah. That's only for Yediyah L'Chila, not Yediyah B'Soif. But all the other Seirim are all one big kapara for all the different types of Tumas, Mikdash, V'Gadosha. Okay, so that takes care of that Nekuda. But we have another problem. In the Mishnah, the Mishnah taught us that how do you know that the Sir Nasa B'Chutz covers for Yesh Ba Ein Ba Yediyah B'Chila V'Yesh Ba Yediyah B'Soif? We knew it because there was a hekesh. The two Seirim, the Sir Lashem and the Sir Lazozel, are hooked to each other. And we say, just like the Sir Lashem requires an aver with a Yediyah, and that was a Yediyah B'Tchila, so too the Sir Nasa B'Chutz is mechaber for an aver where there was a Yediyah, and that will be the Yediyah B'Sof. That works great according to Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Rabbi Shmuel, you learn both of these averes you could take care of with the Sir Nasa B'Fnim. So then what is the hekesh then between the Sir Nasa B'Chutz and the Sir Nasa B'Fnim? Zok to Gemara, you know what that hekesh will be for? So Elamai Hilchas HaIshkis Chitzon L'Pnimi. Zok Gemara, I'll tell you what it's for. A Chiddush. Ma Pnimi Eine Mechaper B'Shar Averes. Just like the Sira Nasa B'fnim is not mechaper on all Averis. It's only mechaper for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov. Av Chitzain Einoi mechaper B'Shar Averis. So this is a big chiddush because we always thought, Mishnah brings down, that the Sir Lazazel is mechaper on all Averis. Here we see that at least Rabbi Shmuel holds that the Sir Lazazel is not mechaper on all Averis. It's only al Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov. I guess the kapara and all the Averis comes from the day of Yom Kippur itself, without the Sir Lazazel. Beautiful. Now let's see the next line of the Mishnah that the Gemara is going to analyze. Al she'ein bo yediyah b'tchila v'loy b'soif. What if there is no knowledge at all by this person who went into the Beis HaMikdash or who ate kachim? He never knew that he was ever tamei, and he still doesn't know that he was tamei. He's totally oblivious to the whole situation. Where is the kapara for such an aveira? Zok the Mishnah, Se'irei Regolim, Se'irei Rosh Chodashim, Mechaprim, Divei Rabbi Yehuda. Correct the Gemara, how does Rabbi Yehuda know this? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, the Amoyer Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, my time of Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reasoning for the Tana of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah? Amar Kra, it says in the Pasuk, in the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh, Usir Izum Echad Lechatos Lashem. This is the last pasuk of the parsha that we learn on every Rosh Chodesh. Usir izim echad lechatos l'Hashem al oilos hatomid yasav v'niska. So what avera does this sir izim mechaper lechatos l'Hashem? What does that mean? Chet she'ein makar boy el Hashem. Any avera that no one knows about other than the Rebbeinu Shalom, or at least the person who did avera has no idea of it. Only the Rebbeinu Shalom knows. That's the Aveira for which the Seir Rosh Chodesh will be Mechaber. Yehei Seir Zeh Mechaber. Frank the Gemara, is that what you learn from those words? Usir Izem Echad Lechatos L'Hashem? Rabbi Shreish Lakish had a completely different limud from these same words. So these same words are already used, so you can't use it to tell you that it's referring to a chet that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows about. Haimi boile lichad Rish Lakish. Tomer Rish Lakish, manish dane seir shal Rosh Chodesh shenemer boy Lashem. V'zabes it's lechatos Lashem. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu seir zeh yehei kapara al shemi'atati es hayoreach. Now it doesn't really mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs a kapara for being memayit yoreach. The Rishonim tell us what it means is HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to be mafayis the moon after it was diminished. And how was he mafayis the moon? By creating a very special occasion on every Rosh Chodesh. On every Rosh Chodesh, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows Klal Yisrael with the Seir to have a kapara for all of these averos of Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov. So therefore, since that's such a wonderful day where HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows Klal Yisrael to have a kapara, by making that day on Rosh Chodesh, it's like honoring the moon, because when the moon first comes out and shines the beginning of a month, the moon is honored with the wonderful occasion of that being a Yom of Kapara. Zok to Gemara, if that's the only limud to be learned from this pasuk, Rish Lakish's limud, then lema kra al Hashem. It should have said in the pasuk, al Hashem. It's for Hashem. It doesn't say that. It says Lashem. So that means my Lashem Lichada Amran to tell us as well that the type of chait that the Sir Anas of Rosh Chodesh is mechaber on is a chait that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is aware. Frag the Gemara of Ve'ema Kulei Lahachudasa. Maybe you only know that limud. What type of chait the Sir Rosh Chodesh is for? Maybe you won't be able to know Rish Lakish's limud because it says Lashem, not Al Hashem. Zok the Gemara im kain nemer kro chatos Hashem. It should have said chatos Hashem if it only meant to say that it's a chet that Hashem knows about, but not the chote. My Lashem, the extra lamed shmat minatarti, we have an opportunity to learn both limudim from these words. So, Frank the Gemara, now that you're telling me that, how do we know that the Seir Rosh Chodesh is mechaper al she'en bo yediyah, not b'tchila, not b'soif? by Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov, it doesn't seem to be limited to Mikdash V'Kadoshov. It's any Avera that's Lashem. Any Avera that you don't know about, that only the Rabban knows about, any Avera seems to be covered by this wording of the Torah, L'chatos Lashem. L'chaper nami afilu b'shar Averas. Dr. Gemara, Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel. Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel learned a limud that indicates, that teaches us, that reveals to us that the Seir Rosh Chodesh is only for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov, where only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows about. Why? Hoil v'zeh ba bizman kavua, just like the Karbonis on Yom Kippur are brought on a very specific time frame, meaning only on Yom Kippur. V'zeh ba bizman kavua, and the Karbonis of Rosh Chodesh are also on a very specific day. So there's that similarity. So we will compare the two with the Binyan according to the way Rashi understands. Just like the Seirim of Yom Kippur are only Mechaper on Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov, Avzeh, so too this Seir of Rosh Chodesh, which also has a Zman Kavua, Einei Mechaper El Al Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov. So that's how we know that the Seir of Rosh Chodesh is Mechaper on Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov, where it's only Lashem, where the violator doesn't know at all that he was ever taught. Zok the Gemara, Ashkhan Sirei Rosh Chodesh. So that is the Makor, that the Sir Rosh Chodesh is for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshov, where there was no Yediyah, not Bechila, not B'Saif. But don't forget, Rabbi Yehuda says that the Seir HaRegalim, all of the Musafim, Seirim that are brought on the Yom Tovim, are also Mechaper for that same Avera. So Sirei HaRegalim Inallah. How do we know that the Seir that's brought for the Musafim of Yom Tov, how do we know that they also are Mechaper on the same Avera? And if you're going to want to tell me that the same binyan that we use to teach from Yom Kippur to Rosh Chodesh, we should also use to teach us from Yom Kippur to the Yom Tovim, that limud won't work. Because Ikal HaMifrach, you can ask the following question. If you want to learn it directly from Rosh Chodesh, from Regalim to Rosh Chodesh, even to Rosh Chodesh, I would say you can't tell it. Just because Rosh Chodesh could be mechaper on this Chomer de Kavera that carries with it a Chiv Kores, if it was Mezid, it's an industrial grade Avera. Davka, a Sir Rosh Chodesh couldn't handle that. Because Sir Rosh Chodesh has a special feature to it that it's Tadir. It's once a month. Unlike Yom Tovim, which are much more sparsely encountered. And even the Yom Kippurim, and if you want the Binyan to be directly from Yom Kippur, well then Shekain Meruba Kapar on Yom Kippur, sure, Karbonis could be Mechaper on industrial grade Averis, because Yom Kippur is a day where there's a lot of Kaparas. But Mehechet Eisi, our regular Yom Tiv, Musaf should be able to be Mechaper on such a severe Aver. You might ask me, we just learned from Yom Kippur to Rosh Chodesh, Bechitema. And if you're going to ask me, and let's turn on to Daf Tes on the base. If you're going to say, if that's a kasha, you can't learn from Yom Kippur because it's Meruba Kaparosoi, well then how are we able to learn from Yom Kippur to Rosh Chodesh? And we didn't ask that kasha there. The teretz is because Hasam Kapara Michtav Ksiva. We already have the limud by the Sir Rosh Chodesh. It says Chat Lashem Chatos. So Lashem or Chatos Lashem. So Chatos Lashem already tells us that what is this carbon mechaper for? Every single avera that the person who was over is not aware, the Rebbeinu Shalom is aware. Every avera. It doesn't make a difference if it's a davar chomer, like a chi of chorus, like Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosha, or if it's a light avera. That's what the pasuk itself tells you. And then what we learn from Yom Kippur is to limit the scope and say that it only applies to the Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosha. Therefore, Giluya Milsa Ba'amahu. So by default, without any limit from Yom Kippur, the pasuk itself is mashma any aver that the person who was over didn't know about. And then Yom Kippur could be mamayit and say, no, it's not such a wide scope, it's a much smaller scope. Aval hacha, but when you're talking about the sir haragolim, all it says is that it's mechaper, but it doesn't say from what type of aver it's going to be mechaper. So mehechatez to learn from Yom Kippur that it's mechaper on a severe avera like a chayve krisos. Maybe it's only mechaper on a regular lav. Aval hacha ikal memar kula milsa legamrina. So therefore, it's logical that by Rosh Chodesh we can learn from Yom Kippur that it only applies to Tumash, Mikdash, V'Kadosha. But it's not logical to say that from Yom Kippur we learn that the Siyar Regolim could even be Mechaper on an Avera that comes with a Chiyuv Kares if it was done b'meitzah. So we're stuck. How do you know that the Siyar Regolim are Mechaper on Tumash, Mikdash, V'Kadosha when there was no Yediyah B'Tchila or B'Soif? Ela K'da Amar Abchama Bar Chanina. It says at the beginning of the Parsha of Yom Tovim in Parshas Pinchas, Usir Echad Lechatos. That's what it says by the first shtickle, which is Rosh Chodesh, and then there's a separate little parsha for every Yom Tov, and at the end of each one of those parshas for Yom Tov, it says Usir Echad Lechatos. The Vav Usair connects the Yom Tovim to the first Seir that's mentioned, which is Rosh Chodesh. Hachanami Seir Usair. So therefore, the iskish seire regolim l'seire rosh chadosh. Since by Yom Tov it says v'seir, meaning just like the earlier parsha of Rosh Chodesh, it tells us that the same kapara that the Sir Rosh Chodesh is for is also for the Sir Regolim. Ma seire rosh chadoshim in mechaper and ela al she'ein bo yediyah loy betchila v'loy b'soif. Av sirei haragolim eina mechaperin ella al she'ein bo yediyah lo b'chtila v'lo b'soif, meaning chayve creases of tumash mikdash v'kadoshav. Beautiful. So that takes care of the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Now the Gemara has an interesting clair. It's mechaper if there's no yediyah b'tchila and not yediyah b'soif, meaning a person was totally oblivious to the fact that he became tamei and he walked into the Beis Hamikdash. Now, there's two scenarios for how this could occur. Either he became Tamei and nobody saw and nobody knows. He walked over a caver and nobody knows, nobody saw, which means not only does he not know now that he violated going into the Beis Hamikdash when he's Tamei, he will never ever know. But there's another variation of what the case could be, where someone did notice that he walked over a caver, but he didn't have a chance to tell him. So right now, this person has no idea that he violated any Avera, but he might find out. So the question is, would that also get a kapara from the Sir Rosh Chodesh and the Sir Regolim? Ibayalahu. Ki Amar Rabbi Yehuda al she'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif. Is that hanamili b'chet she'ein soifei livada? Only it will never ever be known because no one saw. Avol chet she'soifei livada. But if someone does know, he just didn't share it yet. That's like there was a yediyah b'soif, and therefore the sir hanasa b'chutz via makipur mechaper, and not the sir haragolim, and not the sir Rosh Chodesh. Oydilma afilu chet shesoifei livada, but hashtemia chet she'ein maker boy ella Hashem karinabi. Right now, since this was not disclosed to the violator, it still fits into the category of there's no yediyah b'tchila, no yediyah b'soif, and the Sir Rosh Chodesh and the Sir Regolim will cover. Zok Gemara Tashma, we have a very clear ayah because the Brisa says very clear what is covered. Tanya al she'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif v'chet shesoifay livada, and the chet that eventually you'll find out, but now you don't know, is also niskaper with the Sirei Haragolim u'Sirei Rosh Chadoshim mechaprim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So it's the beautiful pshitas to the shaila, a black and white brisa that says that that is considered ein ba yediyah v'tchila, the ein ba yediyah v'soif. Beautiful. So now we are going to shift away from Rabbi Yehuda. Now remember, Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah was the Tana who said that every carbon was very specific to a specific aveira. So there's the carbon oil of a if there was a yediyah b'tchila or an yediyah b'soif. If there was only a yediyah b'tchila, not a yediyah b'soif, that's the sira nasa b'fnim. And if there was only a yediyah b'soif and not a yediyah b'tchila, that's the Sira Nasa B'chutz. And if there's no Yediyah, Sai B'tchila and Sai B'soif, that's the Sira Hiragolim and the Sira Rosh Chodesh. But Reb Shimon argued in our mission, right at the bottom of Beis Amud Aleph. Reb Shimon said, Sira Hiragolim is Mechaper if there's no Yediyah B'tchila and no Yediyah B'soif. Avaloi Sira Rosh Chodesh. The Sira Rosh Chodesh is to be Mechaper in a different Avera, and that's the Avera of someone who's Tahar, who eats Kachim, and the Kachim are Tahar. That's what the Sira Chodesh is. So Amar Belazar, Amar Baishya, my time made Reb Shimon. How does Reb Shimon know this Allah? The teretz is Amar Kra. It says in the pasuk, in reference to the Sira Chodesh, Ba'isa Nasan Lachem. Now this pasuk is an interesting pasuk. This is the pasuk when Moshe Rabbeinu on this 8th day of the Miluyim, when Elazar and Isamar and Aaron, they burnt this Sira Chodesh. And Moshe Mandam, why did you burn this Sira of Rosh Chodesh? You weren't supposed to, because the Oisa Nasan Lachem Lothes is Avoina Eda. This carbon of Rosh Chodesh is supposed to be Mechaper on the Avoina Eda. What is the Avoina Eda? What type of Avoina Eda are we referring to that becomes Nischaper with the Sira of Rosh Chodesh? Zok the Gemara b'Haikra b'Sira the Rosh Chodesh. And the Yalef Avoin mitzitz. When we want to know what the Torah means by Avoin, what type of Avoin, let's learn it from the tzitz. Nemer kan Avoin by the Sira Chodesh. But nemer lahalon Avoin, when the Torah talks about what the tzitz does. Mal alon tumas basar. The tzitz is meratze if the dam becomes tamei or the basar becomes tamei of an oila, and you're makrabit on the mizbeach, then the halach is that the tzitz is meratze. You're not supposed to be makabit. What if you didn't know and you're makabit? The tzitz maratza becomes a kosher carbon. So just like the tzitz helps legabe when the basar of kosher becomes tamei, afkan, so to the oven that the Sira Chodesh is mechaber for is tumas basar. So I just want to take a small break for 1 minute because I want to look at the two psukim inside, the pasuk that talks about the Sira Chodesh and the pasuk that talks about the tzitz. So I scrolled up to the Torah Ara Shalem, where the pasuk says as follows: Ara and Moshe was somewhat frustrated, and he confronted Elazar and Isamar, and he told him, "Madua lo yachaltem es achatos b'mkoim hakodesh." Why didn't you eat it? Why did you burn it? Ki kodesh kodeshim hu, and now the Gemara's quote: "V'oisa nasan lachem loses es avoina eda l'chaper aleim." So what I want to point out is something very interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu was a little bit upset at them. But what was his thoughts when he was admonishing them, when he was correcting them? So if you look at the Rosh Tevis of Madua Loi Achalta Es Achatos B'mkoim HaKodesh, it spells two words. Madua Loi Achaltem spells Molei, and Es Hachatos B'mkoim HaKodesh spells Ahava. Molei Ahava. Even when Moshe Rabbeinu was admonishing Elazar and Isamar, but it was Molei Ahava, it was full of love. That's how we have to admonish our children and anybody else, full of love. Now let's look at the next pasuk, which is the pasuk of the tzitz. It says, V'haya al meitzach aharon, v'nasa aharon es avoin HaKodeshim, so this is the Avoina Kodeshim. If the Kodeshim become Tomei, the tzitz will be Meratza. By Rosh Chodesh it says, Es Avoina Eda. So we learned that just like Avoin by the tzitz is referencing Kodeshim meat that became Tomei, that's what Avoin of the Sira of Rosh Chodesh is referring to. So let's see the Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara, if you're going to learn Avoin, fragt the Gemara, Imal halon oilin, if you're going to say that you're learning from tzitz, well, by the tzitz, we know that if the basar becomes tamei, it's still oilin, it's still a good carbon if it's brought on the mizbeach. So why don't we learn that the seer Rosh Chodesh could do the same? Afkan oilin. Why don't you say that that what you also learn from the tzitz is that just like the tzitz is maratza, so too the carbon should be maratza. And I'm going to look at the Rashi in the skinny lines, 5 lines before the end of the skinny lines. Imala halan oilen ma tzitz edim achaper al shum chet el maratza al ha'oilen, just like the tzitz is not machaper on an avera, it just makes the carbon a kosher carbon. Avzeh yirat al oilen. So too, the seer of Rosh Chodesh should be mirat al oilen, kihechad of a tzitz, exactly like what the tzitz does. So you might ask, why do I need the tzitz to be oila and the seer of Chodesh? If the tzitz does it, so it's taken care of all the time. Why do you need the seer of Chodesh? But Rashi v'nafkamina l'hechad nishbar tzitz. What if the tzitz broke that day and there was no tzitz? So the kasha is, who said what you learn from the tzitz is that it's mechaper on the neveira, the person who's tar, who ate kachim that's tamei? No, maybe it does exactly what the tzitz does and nothing else. And that is, it's maratza the carbon in the event that the tzitz is not around because it had broken. Zok to Gemara, I have a pasuk, ksiv. It says, avoin ha'eda ksiv. It doesn't say avoin ha'kachim. Avoin ha'kachim, like it says, but a tzitz means that there's a problem with the kachim. But here it's avoin ha'eda, to mechaper on the person who did something wrong. So that's not the tzitz maratza, that's a kapara for an avera, so it has to be referring to a person who did an avera. He ate kachim that's tamei. That's what the seir Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for. But fragt Gemara michti, migmar gemiri mehadot. There is a gzera shava to compare the tzitz, the kapar of the tzitz, to the kapar of the Rosh Chodesh. So why don't you say they do both? Nechaper the Rosh Chodesh adidei. Rosh Chodesh should do avoino eda, which means the aver of someone who ate kachim that was tummy. But there the tzitz, it should also be able to be maratza. Let it do both. Nafkamina, why does it need to be maratza on the tzitz? Like Rashi told us, leicha the nishbar tzitz. Omar Kra, the Torah says avoin. Avoin echa tu noisei ve'enoi noisa beid avoinos. It says avoin da'edu, meaning it only has a single purpose. It could only be maratza on one avera, and that is the avera of someone who ate kachim that's talking. So frek Gemara, okay, but tzitz also says avoin. When the chaper tzitz adidei the adirash chodesh. Let the tzitz do both. What do I benefit from the tzitz being mechaper on tumash mikdash v'kadoshov if I already have the shir shor chodesh? Nafkaminia l'tuma de'ira bein zelazeh. What if someone ate tuma between two Rosh Chodashim in the middle? The tzitz should be able to be mechaper right away. Omar Kra, the pasuk says oisa. By the seer of Rosh Chodesh, it says oisa. Only the seer of Rosh Chodesh could be mechaper for someone who ate kachim that was tummy. Oisa noise avay. Only the seer of Rosh Chodesh vein acheres noisa. So that's one pshat in how Reb Shimon knows. That's one shot, and how Reb Shimon knows that the Shir Chodesh is mechaper on somebody who ate kachim that was tummy. But Reb Ashi says, I have another way to understand. No, I'm sorry. Reb Ashi is coming to remember the other kasha. Why don't you say that the tzitz could do both, and why don't you say that the Shir Chodesh could do both? So the Gemara used the teretz of oisa and avoid echad. Reb Ashi says you don't need that. It says very simple. Ksiv hacha in the Pasha of Chodesh, avoina eda. All it does is avoina eda. Eda v'lekachim. It could only be mechaper on people who do an aveira, meaning you ate kachim, but it can't be mechaper on the kachim itself, meaning it's not able to make the carbon a good carbon. V'hazim ksiv, and in reference to the tzitz, it says avoina kachim, meaning it could only deal with being machshir the kachim. It cannot deal with being mechaper of an aver of a person. Kachim v'lo eda. So Zok Gemara, okay, Ashkechan si'irei Rosh Chodashim the mechapri al Torah shachal satom. We got that. But se'ire regolim, the mechapri al she'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif minala. So let's think a second. How did Rabbi Yehuda know? Rabbi Yehuda knew it because he learned a limud of a binyanav from Yom Kippur to Seir Shel Rosh Chodesh, and then he learned from Seir Rosh Chodesh to Seir Haragolim. But Reb Shimon can't do that because Reb Shimon holds that the Seir of Rosh Chodesh is for eating kachim that's tamei. So how would he know that the Seir Haragolim is mechaper al she'ein b'yidiyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif? He can't learn it out of the Seir Rosh Chodesh. Minalam. So the Gemara, he absolutely could. Amar Abchama b'Rabbi Chanina, Seir was Seir. You see in the parasha of Pinchas when it says the Seir of the Yom Tovim, it says Useir, comparing it to the Seir of Rosh Chodesh. Hachanami Seir, we compare it to the Seir of Rosh Chodesh, but not to be exactly like Rosh Chodesh and to tell us it's about eating kachim, that's tummy. Rather, it's similar to Rosh Chodesh, but not exactly the same. And let's turn on to Daf Yud Amar Aleph. The iskish seirei haragolim lisirei rosh chadash, and you make the hekish. But what is the hekish? Ma seir de rosh chodesh, the milsa the kodesh mechapri. It's mechaper in something related to kachim, and that means if someone who was tar ate kachim, that's tamei. Av seir regolim the milsa the kodesh mechapri. It's also something to do with kachim, but not exactly the same thing as rosh chodesh. The chitem, if you're going to say nichberu adar chodesh, it should be mechaper on the same avera that Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for, which is eating kachim that's tamei. Zok Gemara hamrin oisa noise oven v'nachan noise oven. The pasuk oisa bar Rosh Chodesh, the same way we used it a minute ago to exclude tzitz, we can also use it to exclude the sir haragolim. So what else are you going to apply the Sir HaRagolim to? The Chitema Nichbru Adiyoi Makipurim. Are you going to tell me it should be Mechaper on the same type of Averis of Yom Kippurim, meaning Yediyah B'tchil V'lo Yediyah B'soif? For that, Ha'amrinan Achas B'shana. It says Achas B'shana, Kapara Zu Loi Tehei Ela Achas B'shana. The Kapara of Yom Kippurim is only Achas B'shana. So whether it's Yediyah B'tchila v'lo yediyah b'soif, which is the sir nasa b'pnim, or if it's yediyah b'soif, but no yediyah b'tchila, which is the sir nasa b'chutz, it says achas b'shana there to say that those are the only times where the kapara for those averis are available. Harminim achas b'shana kapara zu lo yisehei ela achas b'shana. So amai mechapri. So what exactly is the sir of the regolim going to be mechaper for? Iyal sheyesh b'yediyah b'tchila v'yesh b'yediyah b'soif. That also is covered. High bar carbon. That's the one who brings a carbon oil of a and iyal sheyesh b'yediyah b'tchila ve'ein b'yediyah b'soif. That's the seir nasa b'fnim v'yom kippurim toila. And iyal she'ein b'yediyah b'tchila ava yesh b'yediyah b'soif. That's the seir nasa b'chutz v'yom kippurim mechaper. So what other avera is left for the seir of the regalim to be mechaper? Al korachach ein mechaper elo. That's what the Seir HaRegalim is mechaper for. So when I finished here today, I saw that people were confused because this is a little bit of a complicated Gemara, what's covering for what, and that's why it's very appropriate to end the Gemara with the line, we're so confused, we don't understand the beginning of the Gemara, we don't understand the end of the Gemara, but Baruch Hashem, tomorrow, Baruch Hashem, we're going to go weiter. I want to wish everybody a good gewünscht the Woch, Mazel the Woch, Simcha the Woch. And this week should be the week that all of the hostages should be freed and there should be no more suffering amongst Klal Yisrael.
Amen, amen. Shkoyach.
Shkoyach, a good Woch.
A good Woch.